Ilara Vance knew her 20-year escape was over. On the misty Tuesday morning, she learned her new novel had hit the top of the bestsellers list. For millions of readers, this success signified a well-deserved victory for a mysterious, reclusive author. But for Ilara, that list was not a triumph, it was an exposure. A cruel spotlight that dragged her from the deepest shadow where she had been hiding for 2 decades. Because that list had not only caught the attention of ordinary readers, but also of the most dangerous, most unforgettable ghosts of the past. And the fictional, charismatic monster she had created within the pages of her novel was about to prove that his real-life counterpart was far more ruthless, far more intelligent, and that an author does not always get to write the ending to their own story. Ilara's life was built upon 2 conflicting foundations, a perfect memory and an absolute desire to be forgotten. Her modern, gray, sharp-lined house, built on a rocky island off the coast of Maine, was an architectural reflection of this contradiction. From the outside, it was a work of art, with enormous windows opening to the fierce beauty of the ocean. But those windows were made of bulletproof, ballistic glass. The house was surrounded by state-of-the-art motion sensors, thermal cameras, and an invisible laser fence. Inside, Ilara's world was governed by silence and control. She had no social media, no personal phone. Her only connection to the outside world was an encrypted email account she used through her agent, changing the password every week. She was not an author. She was a prisoner, the sole witness in a self-imposed witness protection program. Her curse was also her greatest talent, a photographic, or more accurately, an eidetic memory. Every word she heard, every detail she saw, was recorded in the deepest recesses of her brain like a video recording device, never to be erased. 20 years ago, this talent had made her the most valuable asset of the world's most powerful, most secret corporate political cabal, an organization that called itself simply the Syndicate. She was the organization's court stenographer. But her records were not just for official proceedings. She was the only recording device trusted by the Syndicate's leader, Julian Thorne, in their darkest, most illegal meetings. In those rooms, conspiracies that changed the fate of nations, plans that crashed markets, decisions that ended people's lives were made with a whisper, and Ilara's fingers, at a speed of hundreds of strokes per second, would translate those whispers, those poisonous words, onto encrypted microcassettes. She remembered everything. The cold, snake-like hiss of Julian Thorne's voice as he gave the order that would end a rival's career, his expressionless face, the smell of cigar smoke in the room, the crystal clinking of whiskey glasses. And 20 years ago, when what she heard in those rooms horrified her, she disappeared one night like a ghost with a copy of those tapes. Since that day, she had been living with those memories, with those whispers she could never forget, and she had found only one way to cope with these memories, to write them, to dilute the poison of reality with the antidote of imagination by hiding them behind the safe curtain of fiction. Her new novel, The Albatross Agenda, was the culmination of this process. The book told the story of a global corporation and a web of intrigue run by its ruthless but brilliant CEO. Critics praised the villain of the book in particular, the charismatic, manipulative, and philosophically deep character of Augustus Thorne. They called him one of the most unforgettable villains in modern literature. But for Ilara, he was not a character. He was a ghost. Augustus Thorne was Julian Thorne himself. His way of speaking, his way of thinking, his ruthless logic, everything was there. Ilara had seen this as a form of therapy, a form of revenge. She thought that by imprisoning that monster in the pages of a book, she had rendered him harmless. How wrong she was, she realized with the excited phone call from her agent, David. "Ilara, I have incredible news," David shouted from the other end of the encrypted line. "Paramount Studios called. They want the movie rights to the Albatross Agenda. Their offer is record-breaking. This is going to change your life, Ilara." Ilara, in front of her window overlooking the ocean, froze. Change your life. David had no idea how right he was. A book was a quiet whisper, but a movie was a scream shouted to the whole world. When that character, that story was projected onto a giant cinema screen, it would be out of her control, and the people who knew that character in real life would hear that whisper. At the same time, on the top floor of a skyscraper in Zurich, in a minimalist and cold boardroom, Julian Thorne was reading the same news on his tablet. He did not read fiction, but this news had caught his attention. He began to read the summary of the novel: a global corporation, a ruthless CEO, and then that detail. In the novel, the character of Thorne is described as trapping a rival through his greatest hobby, rare orchids. This was a very specific method that he himself had used in a syndicate operation 20 years ago, a method no one knew about. This could not be a coincidence. This was a message. That little stenographer from 20 years ago, that quiet mouse, was alive somewhere and was sending him a threat. Thorne did not get angry. He never got angry. He just pressed the button on the intercom. "Mr. Sterling," he said to his head of security, "bring me everything you can find about an author named Ilara Vance. Everything."
Ilara did everything she could to cancel the movie deal. She tried to convince her agent, David, that it was a personal project, that she didn't want it to be adapted for the cinema. But David attributed her illogical resistance to an artist's whim. This friction isolated Ilara even more. Meanwhile, Thorne's team, that professional army of shadows under the command of Mr. Sterling, had already started working. There was no record of an author named Ilara Vance before the last 10 years. No school, no family, no tax records. She was a ghost. So Sterling decided to hunt his prey using its own bait, the book itself. They began to read the book, not just as a story, but as a code. The rare words the author used, the statistical patterns in the sentence structure, the anagrams in the characters' names, everything was analyzed as a potential fingerprint, a clue. Ilara could feel the net closing in on her. She had started to see small anomalies in her security system that she couldn't explain. At night, a dark van, which shouldn't normally be there, had appeared on the mainland opposite her island, visible through binoculars. Her fortress no longer felt safe. Hiding was no longer an option. If she waited, they would find her. So she had to counterattack. Before Thorne's team could decipher the codes in the novel and get to the hiding place of those cassettes before her, she had to get those cassettes and use them as a final trump card, a final weapon. It was time to leave her sanctuary, her 20-year-old fortress. That night, Ilara changed her identity once again. She cut her hair, changed its color, put on simple, ordinary clothes. She destroyed all the digital traces in her house, and on a stormy night, left the island in a small boat. She was returning to that dangerous, fake identity-filled world of deception she thought she had left behind. Her journey was taking her back to the city where the syndicate once reigned in the shadows, Chicago. When Thorne's team realized she had escaped, the level of the game changed. This was no longer a passive investigation, but an active hunt. Sterling knew Ilara was smart. He guessed that she wouldn't go to the most obvious places, that she would have a layered plan. And Ilara's novel was offering them the roadmap. In the novel, the protagonist had to follow a series of codes to find secret documents going to different points in the city. Sterling believed that this was a reflection of the author's own plan. And so, a quiet, tense cat-and-mouse game began in the city. The first clue in her novel was hidden under a bust in an old courthouse. When Alara went there, she saw that the building was surrounded by men in civilian clothes with earpieces. They were waiting for her. But this was part of Ilara's plan. She was a novelist, and like every good novelist, she knew how to mislead her reader, that is, her enemy. She never entered that courthouse. Instead, from a cafe opposite, she watched them fall into her trap. The clues in the novel were not a real map leading to the cassettes. They were just misdirections, fake targets designed to slow down Thorne's team, to exhaust their resources, and to distract them. While Ilara was tiring the hunters after her, using these fake clues to go from one end of the city to the other, she was advancing towards her real target. The real cassettes were hidden in a much simpler, much more personal place. 20 years ago, before she escaped from this city, they were hidden under the floorboards of room 237 of a small, cheap, now closed hotel where she had spent her last night. This was the only detail that was not in her novel. This was a secret that was only in her memory. When she reached the hotel, she saw that the building was abandoned, in a dilapidated state. She slipped inside. The dust and decay of 20 years covered everything. She found that familiar room. Her heart was beating with both excitement and fear. She lifted the floorboards with a small crowbar that she had brought with her, and there, in a waterproof box, lay those dangerous microcassettes. Her 20-year-old past was in the palm of her hand. Just as she took the box and put it in her bag, she heard a voice behind her. "Impressive, Miss Vance. Truly impressive." It was Mr. Sterling, Thorne's head of security. He had 2 more men with him. All those complex clues in the novel, they were all a deception, weren't they? The real target was always the simplest, the most emotional one. Sterling was a smart man. He had figured out Alara's game at the last moment.
Alara was cornered, but she had anticipated this moment too. This was her final trap. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice calm, "but you didn't anticipate my final trick." Alara pressed a small button in her hand. In that moment, a breaking news notification from an international news agency popped up on Sterling's phone. The notification reported that a small, anonymous, but verifiable document related to a financial scandal that the syndicate was involved in 20 years ago had been published. This was a system that Alara had set up as an insurance to leak just one of the thousands of secrets on the cassettes to a journalist with a specific signal. This, Alara said, was just the beginning. That box is empty. The real cassettes are somewhere else. And if something happens to me, or if your boss Julian Thorne doesn't leave me alone, the rest of the cassettes will continue to leak to all the news agencies in the world, one every hour. The rules of the game have changed, Mr. Sterling. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm negotiating. This bluff, or reality, had worked. The leak caused a small but big enough tremor in the financial world to get Thorne's attention, to make him panic. Thorne now understood that he was no longer dealing with a scared ghost, but a calculated, intelligent opponent. Bypassing his security team, he contacted Alara directly through an encrypted channel. He proposed a meeting. He wanted to negotiate for the real cassettes for the last time. The meeting place was a neutral, public place, but one with almost no escape. A slowly rotating, glass-walled restaurant at the top of the famous skyscraper in Chicago. The final confrontation took place in the silence of that slowly rotating restaurant, while the city lights sparkled like a jewel beneath their feet. It was a battle of words and wits. Thorne offered Alara everything: money, a new identity, a lifetime of security. In return, he wanted only those cassettes and her silence. Alara listened to him, and then she refused. "What you don't understand, Julian, is that this is not about money or security. This is about the story being told correctly. Elara played her final card. She explained that the cassettes were in different bank vaults in different countries, and that each of them was protected by a code that had to be entered by her every 24 hours. If she didn't enter that code, the contents of all the cassettes would automatically be leaked to a predetermined list. This was her real dead man's switch. Killing her would only speed up the end. For the first time in his life, Thorne understood that he was checkmated. He could not threaten her. He could not bribe her. He played one last gamble. He used his psychology. He appealed to their common past, that intellectual connection, that strange friendship in those dark rooms. He invited her, seductively, back to his world, the world where power and intelligence reigned. This was Elara's final test. She had to make a choice between her safe fictional world and the dangerous, complex reality. She made her choice. "The truth," she said, getting up, "has already been written, Julian, and soon everyone will read it." She turned her back and quietly walked away from that slowly rotating glass tower, from that trapped man. The first full transcript was leaked the following week. Thorne's seemingly untouchable empire began to crumble like a house of cards. Investigations, arrests, scandals followed one another. And Elara, after setting that mechanism in motion, disappeared again, this time for good. She had sent the remaining cassettes to a trusted international consortium of journalists to be published periodically. She had written the end of her own story and had left the stage. A year later, Florence, Italy. In a small, independent bookstore in one of the city's historic streets, a woman who looks like an older, more peaceful version of Elara is working behind the counter. A customer brings a worn-out copy of The Albatross Agenda to the counter. Is it true? They say the terrible villain in the book was inspired by a real person. Elara looks up. A faint, enigmatic, wise smile appears on her face. In every good fiction, there is a grain of truth, isn't it? She had finally found a way to live with that perfect, that cursed memory of hers, not by hiding it, but by turning it into stories, by blurring forever that fine line between reality and fiction, and in doing so, by finding that personal justice and that most sought-after peace that neither the police nor the courts could give. Behind every genius lays a secret, sometimes the source of that genius, and sometimes a threat to destroy it. We will continue to uncover the untold stories and files of those who, like Elara Vance, built new lives to escape the echoes of their past or who were crushed under those echoes. To not miss the secrets of these stolen pasts, don't forget to subscribe to Stolen Past Stories until we open another secret file to explore another veil of secrecy.